Okay, welcome back. You're busy. We know that. You want the important stuff quick without digging through everything yourself. That's what we do here in the deep dive. So today we've got two seemingly separate things we're looking at: the recent Canadian election results and, well, the first 100 days of Donald Trump's second term back in the White House. Stick around because we think there's some really interesting connections here. Big consequences, too. Our goal, really, is to unpack how Trump's return immediately started affecting Canada, a key ally. And what does that tell us about the bigger picture, North America, global shifts, all that?
Yeah, it's quite fascinating, actually. It's like watching this real-time case study of how interconnected everything is. You've got this major political event up in Canada, and it's happening right alongside these pretty big policy shifts down in the U.S. It gives us this, well, unique viewpoint to look at modern international relations, of how domestic stuff ripples outwards.
Okay, so let's start at North then. Canada. Mark Carney, the Liberals, they won. Looks like they might need the NDP to help them out, but still, that's their fourth term in a row. No majority, though. What's really amazing is just back in February, the polls had them, 20 points behind? I mean, that's a huge turnaround. What happened there?
Well, the sources we looked at really point towards Donald Trump's return to the White House being uh, a major factor, a catalyst almost. There was this, definite uptick in patriotic feeling across Canada. It seems like the idea of another Trump presidency really focused people's minds, got voters rallying behind Carney and the Liberals. Like they needed, experienced leadership for what looked like a potentially rockier relationship with the U.S.
And Carney definitely leaned into that narrative. That quote from him was pretty stark, wasn't it? Our old relationship with the United States is over, unfortunately, and America's leadership of the global economy is over. This is our new reality. We have to recognize it. Definitely.
That's quite a statement. What's the thinking there? Direct. Oh, it's strategic for sure. I think by painting this pretty blunt picture of a changed U.S.-Canada relationship, Carney was positioning himself, his party, as the safe hands, right? The ones to protect Canadian interests. His campaign really hammered home his finance background, his readiness to, push back hard against trade threats or even that annexation talk we heard. He promised to fight Trump's counter-terrorists with Canada's own projecting strength.
Right, and then boom, Trump drops that Truth Social post. On Canadian Election Day, no less, offering tax cuts, military boosts, quadrupling industries with zero tariffs or taxes, he wrote, but only if Canada becomes the cherished 51st state. Wow, the timing alone feels, deliberate, provocative. What effect did that have?
Well, it certainly didn't hurt Carney's message, did it? Whether Trump meant it to sway votes or just, make a point, it underlined the potential challenges Carney was talking about. It probably just added to that sense of urgency for Canadian voters. And remember, that record early turnout, 7.3 million people. It's a perfect example of how one leader's rhetoric in one country can directly stir things up politically next door.
Okay, so the Canadian election looks like it was significantly shaped by Trump's return. Now, let's pivot south. Trump's first 100 days back, rapid remaking is the phrase that keeps popping up. It sounds like things move fast. What were the big moves in those first few months?
The sources definitely paint a picture of a very assertive use of executive power, trying to drive change on multiple fronts quickly, lots of executive orders, directives, signaling a clear intent to reshape policy both at home and internationally.
And right out of the gate, we saw that social media post from Vice President J.D. Vance questioning judicial power, saying judges aren't allowed to control the executive's legitimate power. That digs at the separation of powers, doesn't it? What's behind that?
Oh, it absolutely does.
Yeah.
That statement really pushes back against judicial review, which has been around for, 220 years. Vance's comment suggests a view where the executive branch has maybe broader authority, less checked by the courts. It aligns with certain interpretations of executive power, especially in areas like national security, foreign policy. It signals they're willing to test those boundaries.
And we saw actions reflecting that, right? Trying to grab spending control from Congress, unilaterally cutting funds for programs like USI, even that attempt to basically dismantle the Department of Education or drastically change it. And Congress, Republican-controlled Congress, mostly silent. Why so quiet?
Well, there could be a few things going on there. Maybe just general agreement on the policy goals between the White House and many Republicans in Congress. Plus, the presidency itself carries a lot of weight,
Yeah.
influencing the agenda, party discipline. Like you said, the courts have definitely pushed back. Over 100 rulings already, stopping actions they saw as unconstitutional. That tension between the executive and the judiciary, That's definitely a key thing to watch.
Yeah, that example with the Venezuelan deportations is striking. Shipping over 200 people to El Salvador using wartime powers, skipping due process. Even a Republican-appointed judge was, quote, shocked. That shows how far they're stretching things, doesn't it?
It really does. It raises huge questions about due process, about potential overreach. Using wartime powers like that lets them speed things up. Fewer legal safeguards for individuals. And the fact that a judge appointed under the last Republican administration was shocked, that tells you how far these actions are from, established legal norms.
Okay, and then there's this whole Elon Musk angle. The Department of Government Efficiency Doge. He seems like a hero to many Trump supporters, but his ideas for massive spending cuts, they've definitely kicked up some dust, especially worrying people about Social Security, veterans benefits, healthcare. What's the drive for such deep cuts?
The basic idea is often about shrinking government, right? Promoting fiscal responsibility, streamlining things. Musk's involvement just adds this unconventional, almost celebrity element to it. But yeah, targeting major social programs like that, it raises serious questions about the impact on, well, vulnerable people and the whole idea of a government safety net.
And these policies seem to be hitting the economy. We're seeing the stock market sink, interest rates, mortgages going up, consumer confidence is down, unemployment's ticking up a bit, partly because of federal job cuts too. That Liberation Day tariff announcement seemed like a big shock to the system. S&P 500 dropped immediately. What's the thinking behind these tariffs and why such a bad immediate reaction?
Well, the usual argument for tariffs is, protecting domestic industries, boosting local production. But the flip side is they often lead to higher prices for everyone. Other countries hit back with their own tariffs, supply chains get messed up. All that uncertainty spooks investors, hits market stability. That trader, Richard McDonald, his view probably reflects that general anxiety about disruption. Some might argue for long-term benefits, but the short-term reaction often reflects those immediate negative impacts.
And the public seems torn. You've got some support in those old industrial areas hoping for a comeback from these trade policies. But overall, economic approval is down. Even while the administration's tough line on immigration stays popular, why the split?
It suggests people are feeling these policies differently, and they prioritize different things. Some voters might like the immigration stance or the promise of bringing jobs back. But for many others, maybe the broader economic picture, rising costs, market jitters, that's hitting home more negatively.
And that immigration approach, it's been aggressive. Lowest illegal border crossings in over 4 years, the numbers say. But then you hear these really troubling stories, like Myrelis Kazik Lopez seeing her son deported in a photo from an El Salvador prison accused of being in a gang. She insists he's innocent. It raises serious questions about due process again, doesn't it? Deporting people so fast, maybe even permanent residents caught up in campus protests.
Exactly. The administration is likely using existing immigration laws, maybe stretching executive powers tied to national security, border control. But yeah, the due process concerns are huge when people are removed without what seems like a fair chance to make their case, especially if there are claims of mistaken identity or, fears about returning home.
And it's not just individuals facing pressure. We're seeing clashes with big institutions, too. Harvard suing over frozen federal grants because of anti-Semitism concerns. That's a big stand. Though Columbia apparently agreed to White House demands, pressure on law firms to hire conservatives, some offering free legal help, others suing back. Media outlets, too, ABC News settling that defamation suit with a $15 million contribution to Trump's foundation. CBS in talks over a merger. Even the Associated Press resisting calling the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. It feels like a broad push.
It definitely looks like a multi-pronged effort, yeah.
Yeah.
Targeting institutions they see as maybe not aligned with their goals or values, using money, legal action, public pressure, trying to force changes in policies, practices, maybe even who works there. And that FAA example is blaming a diversity initiative baselessly for a plane crash. It shows a tactic of discrediting programs they just don't like.
Okay, wow. So we've looked at Canada's election, Trump's first 100 days. Let's explicitly tie it together now. How did what was happening in the U.S. directly feed into that Canadian election result?
Oh, the link seems pretty direct, actually. Trump's words, especially the trade threats and that, frankly, bizarre 51st state comment, that became a huge external factor in Canada's election. It created this feeling that the relationship with their closest ally was changing, becoming more unpredictable, maybe more hostile. And that seems to have pushed Canadian voters towards the Liberals, towards Carney, seen as the more, steady hand to deal with it all. It's a textbook case of international events directly shaping domestic politics.
So Trump's way of using executive power, his whole approach to international relations, it's creating this cloud of uncertainty, and it's forcing allies like Canada to fundamentally rethink their strategies, maybe even their place in the world.
Precisely. Canada has had this long, mostly stable relationship with the U.S. Now they're adjusting to a neighbor whose actions feel less predictable, maybe more transactional. And you see this real contrast, don't you, between Canada's more traditional, consensus-driven politics and the more unilateral style coming from the U.S. administration now. It's quite a clash.
Right. So putting it all together, Trump's return has definitely triggered these immediate, pretty significant shockwaves, both inside the U.S. and with key partners like Canada. And those first 100 days, they show a clear pattern: assertive executive power, pushing boundaries, challenging norms across the board.
Exactly. And this really leads to the big question for you, the listener, to chew on. With these rapid changes and knowing how connected countries are, what are the longer-term impacts for alliances, for North America's future? As all this keeps unfolding, what part should we be watching most closely?
Definitely food for thought. Thanks for diving deep with us today. We really encourage you to keep following these stories and think about the potential ripple effects for how governments work, how countries relate, and economic stability, too.